What do you do when your faith system no longer fits? Because sometimes you outgrow it. Sometimes you graduate, you ascend, you leave the old, itchy, worn-out way, and you begin to walk in the new. Sometimes you grow. Join the conversation with me, Tony Werfel, author, speaker, teaching pastor, as we help unwrap and rebuild a faith that no longer fits. We learn to walk into the new, messy journey called life. Hello everyone again, welcome back to Faith Undone. Last week, I gave you a taste of how to view a very commonly misunderstood, misused book, and of course that book is Revelation. And so I had a couple of you say, hey, why are you so interested in this book? What's the deal with it? And so let me just give you a little history for just context's sake. When growing up with this book, again, I was over and over and over again told like this was the book. And we again had all of these seminars and we would spend so much time looking and trying to decode this book. So I grew up very fearful, very worried that like the apocalypse was coming and these four horsemen were coming and maybe there was this real beast that was going to kill everybody. And I was told to demonize certain faith systems, and so the Catholics were evil, and there are different groups that we should be careful of, and basically like get ready to hide in a cave. That's the kind of baggage that I have with this book. And so for me, I think it's so important for many of us who've had similar stories with this book to be able to reconstruct it and view it differently. And so if you did not grow up ever wondering about this book or ever getting clobbered over the head with it, this episode may not be the one for you. But if you were someone who's had this book over and over again, just thrown at you, or you've had a lot of questions of like, why, what does this book even mean? Like, what's the purpose? Then listen along, because I think there's a lot of interesting information here. And so last week, of course, we talked about a couple things. So let me just recap with you. Prophecy, the word prophecy does not mean geopolitical predictions about future events. The prophet, the main purpose of the prophet was to share messages of hope and challenge. That was the prophet. And I would argue that the prophet, we have prophetic voices all over in history. And those are those voices who are saying, look, this system, it doesn't work anymore. And we need to consider doing something differently, maybe drastically differently. And so you have like Mahatma Gandhi, you have Martin Luther King Jr., you have so many different writers, some of my favorite, Kurt Vonnegut, others that just call us to usually rethink things. And for me, it's always the sci-fi writers, I think, that get it the best. And so that's prophecy. And so we also have this idea of like, okay, what's apocalyptic writing? Because that's the style John's using. And so I used to, again, think John was prophesying about future events that we have to decode, and he was using that style. But here's the thing. The writing of Revelation, which to us, it makes little sense. It's so weird and cryptic. It's weird and cryptic for a reason, because that is a style of writing. And that style is apocalyptic writing. And the apocalyptic writing of that time, very popular, what it was used for, it was basically used for political cartooning. It was used to poke fun, somewhat safely, at the systems that weren't working. And so you use all of this metaphor and symbol that people are all familiar with. Again, it's the Colbert Report. It's the Trevor Noah. It's that kind of style. It's the satire. That's what we're reading when we look at Revelation. And the only way to understand it is by looking at the history. So again, you can see how people have gone way off course because they've made it something that it's really not. And so the writer John here, what he's doing is he's saying the Roman way of life, the beastly empire that uses force and military might to rule, it does not bring life. That way of ruling, it actually brings a lot of pain and brokenness. And so an empire that doesn't take care of the widow or the orphan or the marginalized, an empire that's built on fear and control, that empire does not last. And so he begins writing. And when you look at chapters 2 through 3, you'll see this thing called the seven churches. And again, anyone who's read this knows. But here's the thing. These seven churches, he writes to these seven different communities. And in my tradition, what we did, and I've seen many others do this too, is what they did is they took those seven different churches and they had to somehow try to make this into future predictions. And so, of course, they tried to make these churches into eras and timelines of history. And of course, these different churches were eras, and of course, they're all very Eurocentric, right? Of course, they have to fit with Europe and America, and so because those are the people who are, of course, interpreting it, right? And so, of course, it's going to be all about America. But what if you're from Africa? Well, then maybe your take on this is going to be different. So, anyways, I was told growing up that these seven churches represented these different eras of time periods and blah blah blah. I'm going to be honest with you, it's ridiculous. That is a ridiculous way of viewing this text. And it's just, if John were to look at some of these interpretations today, I think the dude would probably laugh. He'd be like, what have you guys done? Like, this is nuts. I thought my writing was cryptic. Yours is just crazy. And so he writes, boy, that felt good to say. He writes to these seven different communities, which is not literal, by the way. He's using the number 7, which is a word that means complete. So he's writing a complete message. It's for everyone, not just the 7 churches. And so he shares this message, and the message has a flow to it. It's got a format, and there's a reason for this. Anyone during this time period who's living under Roman occupation, they would have picked up on this. This has a flow to it. There's a format to this letter now to these churches, these 7 churches, that people would have picked up on. And so it's got 6 pieces to it. First, the letter starts with an address to the church. And it's basically like a description of who they are and how well they're doing with sharing this new reality, the new kingdom. So it's an address first. I see you, church in Ephesus, and you look like this. And then after that, after it describes the church, then there's a description of Jesus. And because again, Jesus is their ruler of this different kind of kingdom. And it's connected to, Jesus is somehow connected then to the traits of the city. And so if the city's known for like curing blindness, then Jesus is described as giving sight to the blind. And I promise I'm going somewhere. Just hold on. Then there's a description of or a commendation of the works they're doing and how well they've been doing. So, hey, you've been doing great at such and such. Then after that, there's this other part that, of course, is like the slap to the face. I have this against you, though. Even though you've been doing this and this and this, you still have been kind of navigating away from what brings life. So that's the next part of the message. Then after that, there's the challenge or a warning. If you don't get back in line, if you don't begin to change this or this, the consequences of this will fall. This is what's going to happen. And then of course, it ends with a promise. If you do these steps, if you begin to realign your values and how you see the world and a new kind of ethic, these kind of blessings follow. So that's how the letter, the format to each one of these 7 in those first couple chapters is written. But what's super fascinating about this is that John is using a public address that the people are understanding. It's super subversive. And we miss it because we're not living in this time period. But here's the thing. Emperor Domitian, an emperor like all the rest of them that claimed a virgin birth, called himself the Son of God, had a gospel message of a new reality, he started a tradition where he would bring all of these people to his Domitian games. And at these games, there were these events that would take place, and we'll kind of delve into that a little bit more later. But one of the first things that would take place is that he would have all of the governors from the different provinces come before his throne, which is a throne that was decked in jewels. It's surrounded by a choir of people in white singing songs to him. And again, so anyone who's ever read this book or had it beaten, had their head beaten over with it, you are laughing at this point because you're seeing the connections. So each governor, they'd come before him and he would start addressing them, describing the city they governed. And if it was a city near water, he would talk about himself as having like power over the mighty waters, whatever. If it was a manufacturing place, he'd talk about himself in that way. But after that, he would say, I have this for you. And then he would give them something encouraging. Then he'd say, I have this against you. And then he would offer a challenge. If you don't get stuff together, if you don't begin changing, you're basically dead. Then he would leave them, though, with a promise. And after the promise, the choir would begin singing these hymns to his greatness. So isn't this so interesting? See, John isn't predicting future time eras or asking you, a reader today, to get out your decoder rings, start making crazy predictions. He's actually using the format of the emperor of that time period, Domitian, and he's using it to essentially say, Jesus is our leader. He's our Domitian. The way of Jesus, that kingdom brings life, not Domitian's kingdom. We pledge our allegiance to a different kind of rule. See, for these people, there's this patriotic narrative that was popularized by the emperor, and it essentially called people living under Roman rule to put their full trust in the emperor, allow Roman rule to lead. And Roman rule was all about military power, military might. So pledge your undying devotion to the emperor, to the empire, your allegiance. Give Rome your freedom. Trust that Rome will take care of you. So John, what he does is he offers up that counter narrative. He begins writing the Kurt Vonnegut sci-fi, right? And so his narrative says an empire is strongest not when it's beastly, not when it's the greatest military on the planet. It's not the greatest. It's greatest when it is lamb-like, when it is peaceful, an empire that takes care of the poor, the broken, that cares about their neighbors and even treats their enemies with respect. That's what John is sharing. And so this is absolute political cartooning. It's satire to its fullest. This is what's going on. I have a friend whose son was in school this past year. And he told me this interesting story about what happened. And he the way he does parenting is just different. And I respect it a lot. And so he said, it was time for his son to do the Pledge of Allegiance at school. And his 4th grade son, he stood like the rest of the kids, but when it came time to place his hand over his heart and start reciting the pledge, he chose not to. And the teacher, my friend described this because his son just gave him all the details. He said the teacher noticed and got really uncomfortable. And then his son described the teacher's getting mean. See, she stopped the class, made mention that there was one student that was not participating, so the entire class needs to start again. And you can kind of see where this is going, of course. So this kid refused. And she made them start again and again. And according to his son, it happened 4 times in a row. And so his classmates, they're getting very annoyed. This poor kid is becoming very unpopular with the rest of his class. And he begins sobbing. And then he's asked, questions like, why do you hate America? Why do you hate the military men who are serving this country? Are you ungrateful? And so this poor kid he's going through a lot here. And so it's important to know my friend, he taught his kids that their allegiance falls on something much bigger than American patriotism. Their allegiance is thoroughly wrapped up in a different kind of ethic, one that's actually very counter to the direction that he feels our nation is heading. And so his son was taught that when it came to choosing between patriotism and national pride or a moral ethic, to choose your morality, your ethic, your values, even though it may not be popular. And so his allegiance was not to the flag. It was to this new reality that Jesus spoke of, a lamb-like kingdom. And so this poor kid, he was sent to the principal's office, and a phone call was made home. And so, of course, my friend, he's extremely smart, very graceful, very loving. And so he shared with the teacher and the principal, look, you're trampling over a lot of rights here. And so he did it very lovingly, very graciously. And because he did so, a written apology was given, and the teacher even kind of talked about his son in a positive way to the classroom. But here's the thing. My friend is not teaching his kid to be a terrorist, to be terribly unpatriotic, to disrespect the military. That's not what he's teaching his kid. He's teaching his son to follow a higher ethic, to align himself with more than country or flag, red, white, and blue. He was teaching his son to pledge his allegiance to a set of morals, values, ethics that are higher than those things. And this, I would argue, is what John is doing with his community. He's essentially calling them to realign their allegiance. Don't align your allegiance to power and military might, consumerism. Those are not things that bring life. Realign your values and your ethic. So he's saying you can be a great citizen of Rome, Greece, Babylon, America, yet you can still be a follower of the Christ. You don't have to pledge allegiance to power, military might. You can align yourself with something bigger. And so today, I might ask you, where are your values aligned? Where do you pledge your allegiance? Think about this in relation to not simply country, but also even like the religious tribe you're in, or the community you're in. Do the systems, the tradition, the church you pledge your allegiance to, does it align with your moral and your ethic, your value system? Let me ask you this. Does the faith system you support the freedoms of everyone? Does the thing you salute bring healing and restoration, or does it bring more pain, more brokenness, more beastly destruction? Because the truth is, whatever you pledge your allegiance to is what you begin emulating. This is a verse that says, by beholding, you become changed. So what are you becoming? What are you emulating? What are you portraying? Where does your allegiance fall? If the system you're in doesn't work for you anymore, you can choose to pledge your allegiance to a different kind of kingdom. You can choose to follow a deeper ethic that doesn't pride itself over more bloodshed, more consumption, more. You can pledge your allegiance to a much healthier ethic, a better kingdom that brings healing everywhere you go. I hope you enjoyed that, because I sure did. Blessings, everyone, today, and we'll talk next week. And as always, please, if you get a chance, donate to our Patreon page at tonywerfel.com. We would love to have that support to continue this podcast and other resources we're doing. Blessings, and see you next week.